It is July 21st, 1720. A merchant ship has just made port in the American colonies, bringing the latest intelligence from across the Atlantic. The dispatches it carries paint a grim picture of global instability. We have reports incoming from the capitals of Europe, the coastlines of the Gulf of Mexico, the Atlantic maritime routes, and the local streets of Philadelphia. We know exactly what information arrived that day by reading this document, the American Weekly Mercury. It served as a centralized briefing of global trade and political violence. Across the European continent, monarchs were attempting to enforce rigid order. Kings and parliaments were issuing sweeping mandates, trying to control borders, religions, and the flow of capital by sheer legislative force. But an ocean away, those royal mandates collided with geographic reality. In the colonies, imperial control fractured against local rebellion, rogue privateers, and thousands of miles of unpoliced coastline. The Weekly Mercury provides an urgent, contradictory map of an empire breaking down at its edges. We begin with a dispatch from Paris, dated March 16th. King Louis XV issues a decree aggressively targeting a specific segment of his own population, subjects professing the pretended reformed religion, the Protestants. He enacts an extreme economic penalty. French Protestants are explicitly banned from selling their real estate or moving any of their personal wealth for 3 full years. To guarantee the capital stays trapped within French borders, the king retroactively nullifies all private contracts and deeds of gift. He renders their legal ability to move their own wealth entirely void. This decree is a strict enforcement of mercantilism, an economic system where a nation's power depends on hoarding wealth and labor. To the French crown, retaining population and capital was a matter of state security. Absolutist rulers attempted to micromanage the wealth and religious identity of their populations through legislative terror. In Paris, economic mobility was treated as a crime against the crown. That same Paris dispatch reveals the immediate disruption of global supply chains. The highly anticipated Spanish flotilla carrying silver from New Spain is indefinitely delayed. The stated cause of this delay is a disastrous military clash between the Spanish and the French over colonial settlements along the Mississippi River, specifically at the fortress of Pensacola. The Spanish suffered devastating material losses in the fight, with their transport ships and men of war burned and completely destroyed. Look at this French map of the region. Florida and the Mississippi River outlet formed a highly volatile geographic choke point. Control the port, and you control access to the interior. The Battle of Pensacola was a critical fight for dominance over the entire North American interior, pitting 2 imperial navies against each other. While kings issued rigid economic decrees from their palaces in Paris, the actual borders of their empires were being drawn with cannon fire and destroyed infrastructure in the Gulf of Mexico. The briefing shifts to Northern Europe, where the continent is fractured on multiple fronts. Hessian troops are mobilizing against Russian forces, the Muscovites, while the King of Poland attempts to suppress an internal rebellion of malcontents. The alliances holding Europe together are incredibly fragile. A temporary suspension of arms between Sweden and Denmark is narrowly extended for another 6 months, but the real test of these treaties is how they survive the Atlantic crossing. We jump from Europe to the local ports of New York and Philadelphia to see how this intelligence lands on the ground. On July 16th, a sloop arrives in New York carrying official diplomatic news from London. It reports an entire reconciliation and that a final peace with Spain is nearly concluded. That diplomatic victory is immediately contradicted 2 days later. A sloop arrives from the West Indies, reporting that a Spanish privateer just captured 3 British ships, paying absolutely no regard to the official cessation of arms. This exposes the core paradox of colonial rule. The vast distance of the Atlantic meant that official European treaties were functionally meaningless against local privateers, who operated on outdated intelligence and immediate greed. The back page of the broadsheet reveals the most immediate threat to colonial stability, a state of constant domestic rebellion. The advertisement section functions as a grim, real-time ledger of domestic rebellion. The sheer density of these notices points to a massive, daily resistance. An enslaved man named Jack has escaped. The notice details the physical marks of violence on his back and notes he fled aboard a maritime sloop. Next is Alexander Hopkins, an indentured servant who broke out of a jail in Maryland. He is executing a calculated subterfuge, disguising himself as a sawyer to secure safe passage. We also see the chaotic flight of Marmaduke Coulson. Despite a severe physical injury making him lame in his hips, he outran the High Sheriff of Kent County and escaped using a stolen small boat. The rebellion scales up into coordinated group escapes. A massive bounty of 40 shillings each, or £5 if delivered from out of state, is offered for 3 servants fleeing a single property in Virginia. Another group of 3 men broke out of Queen Anne's County, Maryland. Their escape relied on highly sophisticated logistics. They successfully stole 2 valuable horses to ensure a rapid getaway into Pennsylvania or the Jerseys. Indentured servitude was a deeply violent system of unfree labor. Immigrants sold their freedom for a term of years in exchange for passage. The conditions were so brutal that laborers regularly risked extreme physical punishment or death to escape. The high cash rewards offered for their capture prove exactly how critical this captive workforce was to the survival of the colonial economy. Colonial governors spent their days worrying about Spanish privateers or French armies, but their immediate reality was a constant internal war to maintain control over the people building their empire. When we pull back and view this single intelligence briefing in its entirety, an interconnected system of global friction emerges. At the geopolitical level, empires were aggressively trying to consolidate power. Kings used rigid decrees and locked borders to force their subjects into compliance. But the data extracted from the broadsheet proves that top-down control was an illusion. Royal decrees were instantly undermined by the lag of maritime communication and the self-interest of armed privateers. Whether it was an imperial navy clashing over a port in the Gulf of Mexico, or an injured laborer stealing a boat to escape a sheriff in Maryland, the underlying action is exactly the same: defiance against unyielding state control. In 1720, fractured authority and relentless, decentralized resistance outweighed the commands of any monarchy. The ink of the American Weekly Mercury records the friction of a world where royal decrees were met with an equal and opposite act of defiance.
The Daily Dispatch, history in print. No modern gloss, no modern